Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, sister, for introducing me. What a generous introduction. I'm really happy to be here. I'm sort of honored to be giving this talk here in only my second year here. So thanks everyone for being here, for setting aside an hour of your afternoon to hear me talk about metaphysics of all things. You might be wondering, what the heck is that? Well, I have good news for you, right? Because that's what the talk is about. I'm going to tell you what metaphysics is and why I think it's important. Okay. So here's a summary of the talk. So in this presentation, I will provide a brief overview of what metaphysics is and how it works. People often ask me, what is it that you do? I do metaphysics. Okay, what is that? So now all of you here will be able to walk away from this talk today having an answer to that question. You'll know what metaphysics is. And importantly, you'll know what it's not. So I will describe the theory of truth upon which metaphysics operates and the distinctive integrative method that it uses to uncover deep truths about ourselves, about God, and about the world. It's my hope that this presentation will help others to understand a little bit better what it is exactly that I do and why it might be important. I hope that it will also serve as an invitation to others to join in on the project that I have described, to join me in the pursuit of deep truths about the fundamental structure of reality. So here's an outline of the talk. There are 4 parts. The slides are not super exciting. Times New Roman text on a white background. But what's exciting is the content. So I'll tell you a little bit in the first section on what is metaphysics. Then I'll tell you a little bit about the metaphysics of truth. And then I'll tell you about the truths of metaphysics. There we go. There's the 2 things in the title. And in the conclusion, right, I'll sort of wrap it up and sort of summarize the lessons that I think we've learned from my talk, or that I hope that we have learned by the end of my talk. Okay. So what is metaphysics? Metaphysics is the area of philosophy in which we seek to discover truths about the fundamental structure of reality by means of reason. This includes truths about the world, about ourselves, and about God. That metaphysics takes reason to be its primary tool or instrument is what distinguishes it from similar pursuits in the empirical sciences, which rely on experimentation and observation, and theology, which rely on revelation. In metaphysics, we aim to determine what sorts of things exist, what those existing things are like, and how those existing things are related to one another. Any proposal or hypothesis about what sorts of things exist, what those things are like, and how those things are related to one another, which in some way goes beyond the empirical data and aims to describe the way in which the world really is a metaphysical theory. So let me give you some examples of good metaphysical questions. In a course on metaphysics, you might consider questions such as these. And the text is going to be small for those of you in the back, but I'm going to say everything that's there, so you'll get it one way or another. So here's a good metaphysical question. In addition to the concrete physical objects that populate our universe, like tables and chairs and rocks, are there also abstract objects, things like qualities, quantities, or relations? We speak of numbers all the time. We all recognize various mathematical truths. And anyone who has done any empirical science can tell you that any good scientific theory is full of numbers. But what are numbers? Where are numbers? What are these mathematical and scientific truths referring to when they refer to numbers and the relations that they bear to one another? Are these numbers and relations things that we create, or are they core elements of the fundamental structure of reality? Here's another one. What sorts of physical objects are there? Is all the world just a swirling storm of subatomic particles? Is all the world just a single cosmic field? Or are the objects of our ordinary experience, there's the tables and chairs again, rocks, trees, dogs, cats, and people, just as real as anything else? Here's some more. What is the nature of time? Is time real? Is the passage of time a fundamental feature of reality, or is it merely an illusion of our experience? What is the nature of space? Is speaking of space just a way of speaking of the objects and their relations to one another? Or is space itself a kind of object, a kind of grid or container in which the objects reside? What does it mean for one thing to cause another? Is causation merely very strong correlation? Are there laws of nature? What sorts of things would laws of nature have to be? Can the laws of nature change? Could the laws of nature have been different than how they are? In some other philosophy classes, you'll bump into even more metaphysical questions. So for example, in a course on the philosophy of the person, which I'll be teaching in the spring, you might consider questions as, what is a person? How are persons different from other things? What makes you the same person as the child your mother brought home from the hospital? What makes you the same person as the person who was sitting here 5 minutes ago? Is there any more to us than our bodies? Do we also possess some extra immaterial aspect or part, maybe a soul? What is the nature of consciousness? Are the mind and the brain the same thing? Is there such a thing as free will? And I'm going to keep on going. In a course on the philosophy of religion, you might consider metaphysical questions such as, is there a God? Is there evidence in the world for something beyond it? What would God be like? How might God be related to time or space? And in what sense is God the cause of all things? Even in a course on ethics, you'll ask questions like, what is the foundation or source of morality? What are moral truths and where do they reside? Can they change? And could they have been different? So metaphysics, then, is everywhere. It is almost impossible to do any philosophy or think very hard about anything for very long without bumping into some metaphysical question or other. That was the point of introducing all these questions. You've already puzzled about some of these somewhere, or you will now, right? So to sum up sort of what I've talked about so far in terms of what metaphysics is, right off the bat, metaphysics is not the same as one of the empirical sciences. It's not like chemistry or biology or physics. It's not aiming to tell us more about the world through experimentation and observation. It doesn't use exactly the same method as the sciences. It also isn't the same thing as theology, even though we often talk about God in metaphysics. Theology uses the sources of revelation. So in metaphysics, we're not going to be looking at sacred texts, right? We're not going to be looking at religious authorities, or we're not going to be sort of puzzling about the nature of mystical experience, what we can learn from there. That's not what we do in metaphysics either. We're using reason and reflection to try to uncover deep truths about reality. It's not in competition with these other fields, right? It's meant to supplement them. It's meant to work together with them to get the full picture of reality. It's also importantly not the same thing as like pseudoscience. And by pseudoscience, I mean something here like astrology or parapsychology. If you go to Barnes & Noble and look under the metaphysics section, don't, but if you did, right, you'd find books on tarot cards and sort of crystal healing. And maybe that stuff is cool, but it's not the sort of thing that I do. I don't know anything about that stuff, right? What we're doing, pseudoscience is an attempt to like expand the sciences to reach other conclusions using the same method or slightly change the methods to be able to include these other things that normally science doesn't include. That's not what metaphysics is trying to do when we look at it philosophically. It's not aiming to compete with any of the empirical sciences. It's not aiming to use the same sort of method. So the way that I like to think about metaphysics, it's built right into the name, is a kind of not a pseudoscience, not a sort of empirical science, not a science like theology. It's what I would call a meta-science. The prefix meta means like above or beyond. So to say that we're talking about a meta-science is to say that metaphysics, and I'll talk about the method later on in the presentation, is that metaphysics takes what we know from the empirical sciences and it sort of like takes a step back and reflects on what it all means for us. So it's a meta-science, it's a sort of above or beyond, not instead of, not in competition with. It takes what we know from the sciences, takes a step back, and reflects on what we can really conclude from that. So I like to think then of metaphysics then not as empirical science, not as theology, not as pseudoscience, but as a kind of meta-science, something that reflects on what we know from the sciences and what it all means for us. Okay, so that's a little bit on what metaphysics is. Later on, we'll learn more about what metaphysics is based on how it works, or how I'm going to propose metaphysics should proceed. But since this is about truth, I want to say something about truth. Metaphysics is the area of philosophy in which we seek to discover truths about the fundamental structure of reality by means of reason. But what is truth? What sorts of things can be true or false? What makes something true? How do we figure out what is true and what is false, especially about the fundamental structure of reality? It may come as no surprise that metaphysicians, those who do metaphysics, for some reason we're metaphysicians and not metaphysicists. It makes it sound like we're a bit more like doctors. Like, I can't fix what ails you unless you're puzzling about the nature of existence. Then come see me. Right? I'll write your prescription, take two and call me in the morning. But metaphysicians, those who do metaphysics, have a lot to say about what truth is, about what sorts of things can be true or false, about what makes something true, and about how we uncover deep truths about reality. So in our everyday speech, we speak of some things being true or false in at least two different ways. So what sorts of things can be true or false? Sometimes we talk about things being true or false, but most of the time we're talking about statements as being true or false. So first, we sometimes speak of things as being true or false. Something is true if it is more complete, more perfect instance of its kind. We speak this way when we speak of someone as a true friend, or when we say that any true Buffalonian dips his or her buffalo wings in blue cheese and never under any circumstances in ranch. I'm from Buffalo, right? You see any Buffalonian dipping their wings in ranch, they're an imposter, they're a fraud, not a true Buffalonian, right? I will tolerate it in other individuals because they don't know better, right? Okay, but any true Buffalonian, okay. So a thing can be true in the sense, right? In the technical sense, right, we're talking about truth here in the sense of it being a transcendental property of being. That's a very technical term, but what we mean by that, transcendental property of being is a property or attribute possessed by all existing things by virtue of their existence. In the transcendental property of being sense, the more full, more perfect, or more complete a thing is, the more true it is. Once again, like a true friend, we mean like a full, a complete, not lacking, or a true Buffalonian. That's the real deal. And when a thing is not as full or perfect or complete as it ought to be, we might speak of that thing as less than a true something or other, or a false something or other. The main way we speak of truth, however, is in terms of statements, as a property or attribute of sentences, propositions, or judgments. Most of the time, this is how we use the term truth as pertaining to statements rather than things. We say that a certain claim is either true or false. But not all sentences, propositions, or judgments are the sorts of things that can be true or false. We need to further specify. Questions, commands, or expressions of emotion are not the sorts of things that can be true or false. When I say, "Go Bills," and "Boo Patriots," neither of these sentences is even the kind of thing that could be true or false. They sort of, in a way, sort of like might be the right thing to say and sort of the wrong thing to say, but not because one is true or one is false. They're just not the sorts of things to be true or false. But when I say things like Cleveland is north of Columbus, or Josh Allen threw 3 interceptions on Monday, these sentences can be true or false. And for those keeping track, the first is true and the second is disappointingly, frustratingly, tragically true. So when we are speaking of certain sentences as true or false, what we are speaking of are declarative statements or declarative propositions or judgments. So that takes care of one of our questions in terms of the metaphysics of truth. What sorts of things can be true or false? In one sense, in the transcendental property of being sense, any existing thing can be true or false to the degree to which it is complete or perfect or reaches its full potential. In another sense, in the propositional sense, any declarative sentence can be true or false. But what is truth in this second sense? What makes a declarative proposition true or false? Here, I want to discuss various metaphysical theories of truth, accounts of what it is for a declarative proposition to be true or false. So in what follows, I'll discuss 4 main metaphysical theories of truth, theories of what makes a declarative proposition true if it is. I'll talk about subjectivist, cultural relativist, social constructionist, and correspondence theories of truth. There are other theories of truth that metaphysicians talk about, such as coherentist or pragmatist theories of truth, but for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on these ones. So according to subjectivist theories of truth, a declarative proposition is true for some individual because he or she believes it, and a declarative proposition is false for some individual, either because he or she does not believe it, or because he or she believes it is false. According to subjectivist theories of truth, truth is subject-relative. A proposition is true and only true relative to some individual. But subjectivist theories are famously self-defeating, and here's what I mean by that. Subjectivism is meant to be a theory of truth. It's supposed to be a universal account of what makes any true proposition true. But according to subjectivism, truth is subject-relative. There are no universal truths that extend beyond individual believers, no truths that apply to every believer universally. But if there are no truths that extend beyond individual believers, no truths that apply to every believer universally, then subjectivism cannot be universally true, which means that it is not a universal account of what makes any proposition true. Consider, for example, the proposition subjectivism is true. If it is true, what makes it true? It can't be that it is true only for any individual who believes it's true, because subjectivism is intended to have universal scope. It's supposed to explain why propositions turn out to be true. It is intended as an account of what makes any proposition true. So suppose that I believe that subjectivism is false, which I do. According to subjectivism, that proposition is true for me because I believe it, but it's also false, right? But if subjectivism is false for me, then my belief can't be what is making it true. For then subjectivism would be both true for me, because I believe it, but false for me because of the content of my belief at the same time. That's a contradiction. It undercuts itself. We find the same problem for any account of truth that aims to extend the subject of belief to more than one person, as is the case for cultural relativism. So according to cultural relativist theories of truth, a declarative proposition is true for some nation, community, or culture because the individuals within that nation, community, or culture believe it. And a declarative proposition is false for some nation, community, or culture because the individuals within that nation, community, or culture either do not believe it or believe that it is false. This theory has the same shortcomings as subjectivism. It is meant to be a universally true account of what makes a proposition true. But since it makes truth culture relative, it has no grounds for making a universal claim about what makes a proposition true. For nations, communities, or cultures who believe that cultural relativism is false, cultural relativism turns out to be both false and true for them. So once again, we have a contradiction. So what about the third view? According to social constructionist theories of truth, a declarative proposition is true or false because of some decision, determination, or decree by a particular authority or group of people. Whereas subjectivist and cultural relativist theories of truth are built on the beliefs of particular individuals, social constructionist theories are built on particular decisions, determinations, or decrees. Here, a declarative proposition is true because some authority has declared it to be so, or because some group of people has agreed to treat it as such. Now, there certainly are socially constructed truths. Here's a couple examples. Legal truths are like this. Niagara Falls is on the border of Canada and the United States because we decided that it was. Fictional truths are like this too. Sherlock Holmes has an assistant named John Watson because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle decided that he does. But not all truths are like this. Sometimes authorities declare something to be true and it clearly isn't. And sometimes particular groups of people can agree to treat something as true that is actually false. So, for example, early in its history, the United States, or the powers that were, agreed that human slavery is morally permissible was a true proposition, and they were deeply mistaken about that. Notice, too, that social constructionist theories of truth face similar worries about self-defeat. If all true propositions are true because of some decision, determination, or decree by a particular authority or group of people, then the proposition social constructionism is true is susceptible to the same analysis. It will be both true and false for any person or group of people who rejects it. The larger lesson here, from reflection on these first three theories of truth, is that no theory of truth can offer a universal account of what makes something true if it also relativizes truth to a particular person or group of people. So how do we get out of this puzzle? As soon as you relativize truth to a particular person or group of people, then you're no longer able to give a full account for what makes any proposition true. You can't speak about it being always true if your account says that nothing is always true for everyone. So how do we get around this? This is what the correspondence theory aims to solve. And so we come to the final theory of truth that I would like to discuss, the correspondence theory of truth. The correspondence theory of truth is the simplest and most straightforward. According to the correspondence theory of truth, a declarative proposition is true because it corresponds to the relevant facts in the world. In other words, a proposition is true when and only when the world is as the proposition says it is. A proposition is true when and only when it captures what is really going on in the world. Conversely, a proposition is false when it conflicts with the facts in the world, when it fails to capture what is really there. The correspondence theory of truth is the most natural view of truth to hold. It is the view upon which most of us already operate. In fact, it might seem so obviously right so as not to even be worth mentioning. But as I've shown, it is only one of the many theories of truth on offer today, and there are many who reject it. But it has a lot going for it. Not only is the correspondence theory of truth the most natural view to hold, it also avoids all the problems for the other views. It isn't self-defeating in the way that subjectivist, relativist, and social constructionist views are. It can explain why itself is also true. And it explains why those other views face these problems. What all the other views are missing, and what the correspondence theory of truth alone considers, is the relationship between the propositions that we believe and the way that the world is. All of the other views try to offer accounts of truth without bringing in the world, without bringing in any kind of objective reality beyond our own beliefs and practices, and that is why they fail. So where does that leave us? So far, I introduced the area of philosophy known as metaphysics and began an exploration of the metaphysics of truth. Our guiding questions were these. What is truth? What sorts of things can be true or false? What makes something true? How do we figure out what is true and what is false, especially about the fundamental structure of reality? In answer to the second question, we determine that declarative propositions are the sorts of entities that can be true or false. Though, as we discussed, there is a second sense in which things can also be true or false, like a true friend or a true Buffalonian. In answer to the third question, we determine that the best account of what makes a declarative proposition true is the correspondence theory of truth, according to which a declarative proposition is true when and only when it corresponds to the relevant facts in the world. So what then is truth? If what we have determined so far is correct, then it follows that truth can be defined precisely as St. Thomas Aquinas himself defined it. Veritas est adequatio rei et intellectus. So truth is the adequation of mind and reality, or literally thing and intellect. But what about the last question? How do we figure out what is true and what is false, especially about the fundamental structure of reality? It's one thing to say generally what makes something true when it is, but how do we know which things are true and which ones they aren't? Well, if the correspondence theory is right, as I've argued, it avoids the problems for the other views, we have to look to the world. What it means for something to be true is it lines up with how the world actually is. So how do we figure out whether what we believe actually lines up with the way that the world is? How do we figure out what is true and false, especially about the fundamental structure of reality? That's a bold proposal that we can even do that. And how can we use our reason to do so? In the remainder of this talk, I would like to propose a kind of metaphysical method, a way of carefully and systematically pursuing metaphysical truths, which in some ways is analogous to the pursuit of truths in the natural sciences, but goes in a way above and beyond them, meta-science. So now section 3, the truths of metaphysics. So the task of metaphysics is to discover the fundamental structure of reality by means of reason. As I've said, metaphysicians aim to determine what sorts of things exist, what those existing things are like, and how those existing things are related to one another. And any proposal or hypothesis about what sorts of things exist, what those things are like, and how those things are related to one another, which in some way goes beyond the empirical data and aims to describe the way in which the world really is a metaphysical theory. But how do we figure out what is true and what is false, especially about the fundamental structure of reality? And how can we use our reason to do so? Once again, metaphysics assumes a kind of correspondence theory of truth. Without a correspondence theory of truth, it's not clear that what we're after, right, is the fundamental structure of reality. We might be learning more about ourselves, but are we learning more about the reality? How can we use our reason to do this? A theory about the fundamental structure of reality is not true because I believe it is, or because we all believe it is, or because we have decided that it is. A theory about the fundamental structure of reality is true if it is true, because the propositions it contains reflects as closely as possible the reality they are meant to describe. How then do we determine which metaphysical theories best capture the world as it really is? I would like to propose that the project of determining which metaphysical theories are true, that is to say, which of the various metaphysical theories on offer most closely correspond to the way the world actually is in some ways analogous to the project of determining the truth or falsity of scientific theories. So in the empirical sciences, every possible theory, no matter how outlandish, begins as a live option. Sometimes scientific theories can be falsified by new evidence, though at which point in the investigation we can say that a scientific theory has been falsified is notoriously difficult to determine. But much more often what we have to deal with in the empirical sciences is the reality that there are many, and indeed a potentially infinite number of incompatible scientific theories, they're incompatible with one another, all of which are perfectly compatible with the data that we have. Usually the data doesn't specify which of the many theories, right, that we have is the right one. So what do we do in that case? Are we done? Are there no further means by which we can determine which of these theories is most likely to be correct? What scientists look to at this point is to help them narrow down their options are what they call theoretical virtues found in competing scientific theories. Principally what they look for are explanatory power, falsifiability, predictive success, simplicity, and elegance. The theory that is simplest, most elegant, has the greatest predictive success, remains open to new evidence, and has the greatest explanatory power is the theory that is most likely to be correct. It's not always just disproving theories and proving theories. It's about figuring out which one sort of best captures the data we have and which one sort of demonstrates these other sort of good qualities that make a theory good. So I want to suggest that we can do something very similar in metaphysics. We can first ask whether certain metaphysical theories are both intelligible and internally consistent. Does this theory have clearly defined terms? Does it use its terms in the very same way throughout? Do any of the main claims of the theory contradict one another? Is the theory self-defeating? After that, we can ask whether the theories that we have judged to be intelligible and internally consistent are compatible with and explanatory of all the data that we have. Then we can assess their other theoretical virtues. The key theoretical virtues that we look for in a metaphysical theory are internal consistency, greatest consistency with the data that we have from both the empirical sciences and our own experience, greatest explanatory power, and theoretical simplicity. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these good-making features of a metaphysical theory, which are similar to the good-making features that we use in science to determine which theory is the one most likely to be correct. Okay. So to that end, there are several key questions that we can ask about any metaphysical theory, and these can serve as the criteria for determining how likely to be true the theory really is, and how much more likely to be true that theory is in comparison to others. It's rare that we're looking for which theory sort of is the only one that works. More often what we have are competing theories, and we have to weigh them against one another. So we need not consider these questions that I'm going to talk about in the order that I present them. Indeed, it isn't even in the same order that I just presented them. But we should at some point consider all of them for each metaphysical theory. So first question we can ask about metaphysical theories. Does the theory actually explain the phenomena that it set out to explain? Or does the theory merely introduce additional claims or quandaries themselves in need of further explanation? And let me explain to you some examples. Some of the observable phenomena that might require metaphysical explanation include observations like things change. Things resemble other things in various ways, but not in others. That an object can possess one feature while lacking another. Some truths are contingent, could have been false, whereas others are necessary, had to be the case. Some things cause other things. Time seems to flow in a particular direction, and objects seem to retain their identity through certain changes, but not through others. A good metaphysical theory will offer explanations for these various phenomena, and the explanations that they offer will be satisfying, which is to say that those explanations will not simply raise further questions. So, for example, contingency arguments for the existence of God argue that the apparent contingency of the physical universe, the fact that it could have easily not existed at all, prompts the demand for some sort of explanation for why it does. Why is there something rather than nothing? Maybe God is the explanation. But does positing God as the primary cause of all other things really explain their existence, or does it merely push the need for causal explanation back a step? For the record, I think it helps. In debates on the nature of time, presentism is a funny view, but maybe it's a view sort of that a lot of us ordinarily have. Presentism in the philosophy of time is the view according to which neither the future nor the past exist, only the present exists. It helps to explain why time appears to have a direction. Time moves forward in the sense that as it passes, new entities come into existence and previous ones pass away. But if time passes, how fast does it pass? Could it speed up or slow down? And would we notice? If the present is all that there is, how long does it last? Does everything exist for only a fraction of a second and then it's gone? Another example. If abstract objects like numbers and relations are core elements of the fundamental structure of reality, then that might help explain why our best scientific theories have been so successful in predicting the behaviors of objects and helping us to manipulate and control various aspects of the physical world. For in that case, those theories, with all their references to numbers and relations, really are capturing the world as it is. But if abstract objects like numbers and relations really do exist, what are they exactly? Where are they? And how do we have access to them? So the question here is whether the theory explains the data that we have by means of the senses and we get from the sciences, and doesn't in a way sort of gets the questions to stop, right? If it just sort of raises more questions than it answers, we ought to look to see whether any other theory can do better. Second question. The second question we can have asked of any metaphysical theory is whether it is more complicated than it needs to be. Are there simpler theories that can explain the phenomena just as well? So, for example, do we need to posit God as the cause of all things, or can we account for the existence of the universe without having to go outside of it? Do we need to posit the existence of numbers or relations to explain the success of the empirical sciences? In the philosophy of the person, do we need to posit the existence of souls, or can we explain all the features of human persons, including our persistence over time, without them? To be clear, I think we need all of those things. The third question we can ask is whether the theory itself makes sense. And indeed, maybe sometimes we should start with this one. Are terms, principles, and ideas made sufficiently clear? Is the theory internally consistent, or does it lead to contradiction or paradox? So, for example, some hold that both God and abstract objects exist outside of time and space. But is that even a coherent idea? Could something exist outside of time and space? Another example, eliminativist theories of consciousness say that there simply are no mental states, no thoughts, no beliefs, no intentions. All that exists are physical particles. But someone had to think of that theory, right? And proponents have to believe that it is true, don't they? So does the theory undercut itself? Is it sort of the unique theory, right, that if it's true, no one can actually believe that it is? So the fourth question we can ask of any metaphysical theory is, how well does this theory cohere with what the empirical sciences and our experience tell us about the world? Does the theory conflict with anything we have from these two sources? Does the theory recognize and justify these points of conflict? Does the theory also help to explain or integrate the data of the sciences and our experience of the world? So, for example, that we are capable of making free decisions is a fundamental aspect of our experience as human persons. Some might even say ineliminable. But does that conflict with what physics teaches us about the law of the conservation of energy, or with what the social sciences teach us about the social conditioning of human behavior? In our post-Einsteinian universe, can relationist theories of space, according to which space is nothing more than the various objects that exist and the relations that hold between them, can it be made consistent with our best scientific theories on the subject? Finally, when faced with conflicts or tensions that arise within the theory, or conflicts or tensions that arise between the various beliefs, impressions, or experiences that we bring to the theory, does the theory help to resolve or explain away those conflicts or tensions? Moreover, does the theory resolve any conflicts or tensions faced by other views? So, for example, this is what I tried to do when discussing metaphysical theories of truth above. I highlighted some conflicts or tensions found within each of the other theories and explained how the correspondence theory of truth either resolves or entirely avoids those conflicts or tensions. It has that theoretical virtue over the other theories. And all other things being equal, we should think that that one is on the right track versus the others. So these then are the major criteria by which I think we can evaluate metaphysical theories. It's the way in which I think we can make progress. Even if we can't count certain metaphysical theories out, that doesn't mean that the task is over, just as it doesn't mean that that is the case in the sciences when we have several live options for theories. But okay, let's say I'm right about that. Let's say that that's a good way to sort of screen theories, or at least to sort of evaluate them, to compare them to one another. Why think that these are the right criteria to use? Why think that these are reliable criteria? Why think that answering these questions will actually help us determine which theory is correct, which one lines up with the way the world is? So, for example, why put so much weight on our pre-theoretical beliefs, impressions, and experiences? Why care so much about theoretical simplicity, how complicated or not the theory is? Let me say a little bit more about what's going on in the background here. Regarding pre-theoretical beliefs, impressions, and experiences, operating behind the scenes here is a principle that we might call the principle of phenomenal conservatism. And it has nothing to do with political conservatism. It's just sort of a conservative approach to understanding the world and believing things. So according to the principle of phenomenal conservatism, if something seems or appears to be the case, then in the absence of any counter evidence, that seeming or appearing is in itself grounds for believing that it is the case. Now, the principle of phenomenal conservatism is not saying that everything that seems or appears to be the case is in fact the case. Much of what seems or appears to be the case is in fact false. Even some very common features of our experience, that the sun rises and sets, for example, turns out that's not true. But what the principle tells us is that the appearances are to be treated as innocent until proven guilty. They are the data with which we begin our inquiry. Where else would we start? And so any metaphysical theory that tells us that how things seem or appear to be is not how things actually are carries an additional burden of proof. It doesn't mean that that theory can't be right, it just carries an additional burden of proof. It must provide good reasons for calling into question our pre-theoretical beliefs, impressions, and experiences. And some of the best metaphysical theories give us great reasons to do that. Our task then is to check to see which theories best coincide with how the world seems or appears to be. And for those revisionary metaphysical theories that call these seemings or appearances into question, we need to determine whether those theories have provided good enough reasons to do so. So our experiences, the appearances of things are innocent until proven guilty, but they might be very guilty. We just need a good theory to explain sort of what's going on there and give us good reason to think that the way things appear are not actually how they are. What would count as a good enough reason to call into question our pre-theoretical beliefs, impressions, and experiences? Well, some metaphysicians will point out that our pre-theoretical beliefs, impressions, and experiences are often inconsistent, and that we must abandon at least some of these to retain a consistent set. So if we think about all the things that we believe by means of common sense and put them all in a room, you realize you can't hold all of those things, so something's got to go. Other metaphysicians will try to argue that the simplest, most elegant theory with the greatest internal cohesiveness and the greatest explanatory power is one that forces us to abandon one or more of our pre-theoretical beliefs, impressions, and experiences. So that's what's going on in the background, sort of the innocent until proven guilty approach to how things seem, or what we have from the senses, or what we gather from our own experience. Regarding theoretical simplicity, another principle operating behind the scenes here is called Occam's razor. You might have heard of this one before. According to Occam's razor, all other things being equal, the theory that posits the fewest number of entities, principles, or assumptions is to be preferred. The all other things being equal clause here means that the theories being compared explain all the relevant phenomena just as well. Occam's razor then is only a tiebreaker when we have several metaphysical theories, all of which explain the phenomena that we set out to explain. But why are simpler theories to be preferred? Why think that reality is as simple as we'd like it to be? Why not think that reality is actually very complicated? There are both practical and theoretical reasons for following Occam's razor. First, practically, we have to ask ourselves why we would choose to accept or take on a theory that introduced further entities or gave more complex explanations of the phenomena without any explanatory advantage. Why carry more rocks in your backpack if you don't have to? Second, theoretically, a theory that posits a greater number of entities or principles to do the same explanatory work is more vulnerable to being falsified or overturned, and so more likely to turn out false. By putting itself out on more limbs, a theory increases the likelihood that it will get it wrong. A simpler theory, on the other hand, is much less likely to be falsified or overturned, and so more likely to turn out to be true. Now, even the simplest fully explanatory theory is likely to be very complex. And so we don't need to be concerned that we are oversimplifying at the cost of accuracy. The point here is just that any additional complications in a theory need to be sufficiently justified in terms of its explanatory power. Here's sort of a nice slogan. Maybe we'll make t-shirts or bumper stickers. No additional complication without sufficient justification. You're welcome. So in conclusion, what we're doing when we do metaphysics is trying to discover truths about the fundamental structure of reality by means of reason. Most of the time we do this incrementally, piece by piece, claim by claim. Metaphysicians discuss various theories about properties and objects, space and time, causation and the laws of nature, mind and matter, among others. Most of the time we look at each of these debates individually, sorting through the particular views and arguments found within each. But the ultimate goal, a goal that I hope we never lose sight of, is to compare and contrast comprehensive models of reality, comprehensive views about how the world is in all its detail. So is the world just atoms swirling in the void, and is everything else illusion? There's one model of the universe, kind of a depressing one. Is the world just a single undifferentiated whole, a cosmos, and are we merely arbitrary divisions, repeating patterns within the one whole that is that thing? Or is the world closer to how it appears, a complex arena of causal interactions between things of various sizes and shapes, a world of both change and constancy, sameness and difference, contingency and necessity? And indeed, is the world all that there is? Or are there certain features or phenomena found within our world that point to something beyond it? That, it seems to me, is the ultimate question that metaphysics seek to answer, the ultimate truth that it seeks to discover. And the hope is that something like the method outlined above can help us get there, one step at a time. Thank you.